3 Taunton men have been jailed for playing major roles in the supply of cocaine and cannabis in the town. Clayton Budge, 26, Kai Darby, 25, and Finley Ford, 23, and all from Taunton, were sentenced last week after admitting multiple offences earlier this year. The trio were arrested in July when a warrant was executed at the property in Malvern Terrace. Officers recovered more than 6.5 kilograms of cannabis, cash, and other drug paraphernalia. Mr. Darby and Mr. Budge were both arrested inside the address, while Mr. Ford was arrested after he was seen driving away from the property. Officers seized 1.2 kilograms of cannabis from his car. Following a further search, more than £1,700 in cash and 1 kilogram of cocaine were also seized. All 3 men were subsequently charged and pleaded guilty to multiple offences. Mr. Budge was convicted of possession with intent to supply a Class B drug, cannabis, and being concerned in the supply of cannabis. Mr. Darby was convicted of being concerned in the supply of cannabis, and Mr. Ford was convicted of being in concern of the supply of cocaine and cannabis. They were sentenced at Taunton Crown Court on Tuesday the 12th of November, and they received the following sentences. Mr. Budge received 3 years and 4 months in prison. Mr. Darby received 2 years and 6 months in prison, and Mr. Ford received 5 years and 4 months in prison. DS Charlie Pulling said, "Illegal drugs destroy communities, and those who supply them often prey on the most vulnerable members of our society. We are committed to identifying those responsible, and we welcome the sentences handed down by the court following our investigation."
I've been a detective for the majority of my policing career. I've been a detective at every rank. I think this is an investigation that I will always remember. Following that attack, a group convened on the address and travelled from the Hartcliffe area to Knoll. And on arriving in Knoll, they effectively drove around the Knoll area for a number of times around the Knoll estate, trying to identify people in our submission for the prosecution case, hunting for individuals. Sadly, what we know is that Max was walking from his home address to call for his best friend, Mason. In doing so, as he approaches Mason's house, the Audi drives past them containing 5 individuals. They then see that Max knocks on a door. In doing so, Mason comes out and they enter onto Ilminster Avenue, sadly just as the vehicle drives past them again. That vehicle then decides to engage in conflict, and the occupants get out of the vehicle and attack both Max and Mason. In doing so, Max and Mason run. They are pursued by 2 individuals for both boys who attack Max and Mason. Unfortunately, in the attack, both individuals, Max and Mason, suffered unsurvivable injuries as a consequence of that attack. The police gave immediate first aid to both of the boys and are joined by our colleagues from the ambulance and paramedics. Sadly, despite the best efforts, the boys, whilst once conveyed to hospital, were both declared deceased, and as a consequence of those injuries, none of those wounds were survivable. But I'd like to also recognise the support afforded from around the constabulary, both in the events immediately after. There were significant searches going on to try and identify those individuals that were trying to avoid the police. As a constabulary, it's been a huge and concerted effort to bring these offenders to justice, and I wouldn't do it justice by mentioning just one department, because every department across the organisation have stepped up and supported the investigation into the death of Max and Mason. For me, I'm humbled by their presence, their courage, the dignity in which they've shown, and the courage of, let me be clear that the family members have been in court every day. As part of that court process, they've been exposed to things they should never see. I draw breath every time I engage in a conversation with them, such as the impact they have on me and the sort of strength of character and love as a family they've shown. Max and Mason's memory will live with me forever, but equally I pay respect to all those other families that we've supported in our investigations, because their loss is also huge.
A 45-year-old man who was found guilty of jointly murdering 16-year-old Max Dixon and 15-year-old Mason Wrist has been jailed. Anthony Snook of Hartcliffe was sentenced to life in prison at Bristol Crown Court after a jury found him guilty of killing the two boys in Ilminster Avenue in Knowle, Bristol, on Saturday the 27th of January this year. Mr. Snook both facilitated and drove the getaway car for Riley Tolliver of Weston-super-Mare and 3 others who cannot be named because of their age. During a 6-week trial, the jury were told how Mr. Snook had driven the pack from Hartcliffe to Knowle West as they were hunting for revenge following an earlier incident in Hartcliffe. Mr. Snook was the only defendant to take the stand and plead his case to the jurors, where he stated he didn't know the teens were armed to the teeth, as lead prosecutor Ray Tully KC had described to the jury presenting the prosecution's case. Mr. Snook claimed he thought he was driving them to a safe place and had no knowledge of their malicious intentions or the weapons they had in their possession, 2 of which measured approximately 48 centimeters and 51 centimeters in length. Senior Investigating Officer Superintendent Gary Haskins of the Major Crime Investigation Team described Mr. Snook's defense as fanciful and a complete fabrication in a bid to escape conviction. He added, "Mr. Snook was an adult in that situation. He should have taken responsibility and stopped the 4 other defendants from committing such a heinous crime. We put forward a basis of joint enterprise to the jury, meaning that even those who didn't cause any physical harm to Max or Mason did nothing to deter the others and were even argued as to be encouraging their actions." Mr. Snook played the role of a facilitator and the driver of the getaway car. He drove them around Knowle on the hunt before turning into Ilminster Avenue. He then saw the attack play out and then drove them away from the scene. If it wasn't for him, the boys may well still be alive. Mr. Snook was the first to be arrested in the investigation in just under an hour since the first call to the police was received. When delivering the sentence, the Honourable Mrs. Justice May referred to Mr. Snook as a weak and cowardly man who had multiple opportunities to stop the attack. She added, "For reasons which are impossible to fathom, you lent yourself and your Audi Q2 to a mission in Knowle to extract revenge. In convicting you of murder, the jury plainly rejected your account of taking the 4 boys to a safe house, of not knowing they had weapons. They were sure that you knew what the teenagers in your car were up to, and you assisted them in doing it. You all went hunting for victims around the streets of Knowle, sharking as the prosecution put it. You would have experienced the atmosphere in that car, felt the mad, chaotic bloodlust for the 4 armed teens, yet you still went on. Mason and Max were simply and tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nothing can undo the dreadful events that night last January. Nothing can bring Mason and Max back. No sentence which this court passes can lessen the sense of loss and grief caused to their families." During the sentencing hearing, Mason's sister Chloe spoke in the court about her kind, sweet brother, who she described as so vulnerable and harmless. Chloe added, "He wasn't just my little brother, he was my best friend. He was the funniest person I've ever met. He was silly, funny, and the joker of the family. We all miss him dearly in a need so overwhelmingly strong. Every time I see a kid coming out of school, I think it should be my brother. Every time I see a kid having fun, I think it should be my brother. He won't ever get married or have children. He will never get older in pictures. There were so many things he wanted to do, and he was so worthy of a good life. It's like he is lost and I'm trying to find him." Mason was a good kid who never upset anyone. Everything he did was with pure kindness. "I will never forgive you for what you have done. He could have been your friend, and now he is your victim." Kaylee, Max's sister, also read a statement in court, directed at Mr. Snook and the other defendants. She said, "It was 33 seconds. 33 sinister, moral seconds and my life changed. None of the defendants knew anything about my brother Max or Mason, about how special and important they were to their families, how they were both a pleasure to know, and how kind they were, and how much they will be desperately missed. I want the defendants to know that you killed me that day. You ripped my heart and my soul out. It is broken and unfixable. I had so much more to learn and watch from Max as he grew up, to teach him, to guide him through life as a big sister, to always be there to love and support him. He had so much to learn and know about me, and yet you have robbed me of a lifetime of love and memories by your malicious actions. Along with his 2 life sentences, which run concurrently, Mr. Snook will serve a minimum term of 38 years in prison, minus days already served, before he'll be eligible for parole. Riley Tolliver and 3 juveniles will be sentenced at Bristol Crown Court in December. The judge awarded Crown Court commendations were awarded to Detective Superintendent Haskins, Case Manager D.S. Craig Basil, and Officer in the case D.C. Matthew Cron. The judge also recognised the efforts of the wider investigative team and the composure displayed throughout by the families. Three men involved in a drug line between Manchester and Somerset have been given prison sentences. Officers seized heroin and cocaine from a hotel room in Bridgewater in February, part of the investigation. All 3 men, all from Greater Manchester, were sentenced at Bristol Crown Court on Thursday, November the 7th. On Thursday the 22nd of February, police received information that Curtis Colburn, who was wanted from Greater Manchester area, was staying at a hotel in Bridgewater. Officers attended the room to arrest Mr. Colburn, who initially claimed he was staying in the room alone and provided a false name. A search of the hotel room found crack cocaine and heroin, both with an estimated street value of almost £1,200. Zach Waldman was understood to have been staying with Mr. Colburn in that same room, but was not present at the time of the arrest, and therefore further inquiries were carried out to locate him. The next day, officers gained entry to a property on Riversmead Walk where he was believed to be, and found him in the company of Carl Richardson and a 17-year-old boy who could not be identified because he is not an adult. A number of mobile phones were found at the property, including one directly being used in the drugs line. A review of that device found sufficient evidence that all 4 people were concerned in the supply of illegal drugs. The following sentences have now been handed down by the court. Mr. Colburn, 25, of Umston, has been given a 7-year prison sentence after he was found guilty of being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs, as well as being in possession of a controlled Class B drug, cannabis. He was also given a consecutive 4-year prison sentence for separate matters. Mr. Richardson, 36, of Timperley, has been given a prison sentence of 2 years and 3 months after admitting being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs, crack cocaine and heroin. Mr. Waldman, 26, of Partington, given a 3-year prison sentence after admitting being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs. A 17-year-old who was also admitted being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs, as well as being in possession of a Class A drug with intent to supply, will be sentenced at a Ute court at a future date. Detective Sergeant Hassel said the sentences given are a reflection of how seriously these offences are treated by the court. 3 men are now behind bars for their role in this coercive and illegal enterprise, and we've stopped the quantity of dangerous drugs from causing misery in our communities. Five men who used an encrypted messaging service to discuss importing and transporting vast quantities of drugs have been jailed for more than 30 years collectively. 3 men from Sussex and 2 from Bristol and South Gloucestershire have been sentenced after a police investigation uncovered they were using EncroChat network to move ketamine across the country. Avon and Somerset police became aware of the organised crime group made up of Daniel Newman, Harrison Beasley, Ryan Kaplan, James Marshall and Scott Ryan, and months of surveillance and other investigative inquiries were carried out before apprehending them all. Messages on EncroChat platform were obtained by the police which showed the high value deals were arranged over several months in 2020. The messages included discussions about multiple 6-figure drug deals. Surveillance work was carried out and evidence was obtained showing Ryan would drive across the country as part of the group's effort to transport drugs. A proactive police operation was conducted in Bristol on the 16th and 17th of March this year, where Ryan was stopped in his van and Mr. Marshall was arrested at a Bristol pub by Avon and Somerset police officers. The van was searched and police seized several packages containing ketamine with an estimated street value of £168,000. Mobile phones and approximately £6,000 in cash were also seized. Warrants were later carried out at Ryan's home in Kingswood and at a lockup in Warmley, where almost £8,000 in cash and more ketamine was seized. The 3 men from Sussex were arrested 2 months later. Mr. Newman and Mr. Beasley were jointly charged with 3 counts of conspiracy to supply Class B drugs and 1 count of conspiracy to transfer criminal property. Mr. Kaplan was charged with conspiracy to transfer criminal property and a second conspiracy of supply of ketamine as well. They pleaded guilty to all charges and were sentenced at Lewes Crown Court on Friday the 28th of October. Mr. Marshall and Mr. Ryan pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply ketamine and possession with intent to supply the same Class B drug. They also both admitted conspiracy to transfer criminal property. Mr. Ryan also admitted 3 further offences, namely possession of an offensive weapon in a public place and 2 counts of possessing criminal property. Both were sentenced at Bristol Crown Court on Friday the 25th of November. Recorder Adam Fate Lingham addressed the pair and said, "You were both involved in organised crime group, directing and supplying ketamine on a commercial scale." All 5 men were sentenced as followed. Mr. Newman, 34, of Brambletine in Saltdean, was jailed for 7.5 years. Mr. Beasley, 34, of King's Drive in Eastbourne, was jailed for 8 years and 8 months. Mr. Kaplan, 26, of Kingsway in Brighton, was jailed for 3 years and 4 months. Mr. Marshall, 33, of Seymour Road in Staple Hill, was jailed for 6 years and 9 months. Mr. Ryan, 37, of Albany Street in Kingswood, was jailed for 4 years. A timeline was set for a confiscation proceedings to be heard next year. Detective Sergeant Jason Chigney said, "We welcome the strong sentences handed out to these 5 men and hope it sends a loud message to anyone involved in the supply of illegal drugs. These results come off the back of a complex and lengthy investigation and show that police and other law enforcement agencies are steadfast in their determination to bring down organised crime groups who cause misery in local communities. Crime doesn't pay. It may well be used as a phrase, but it still holds true, and these 5 men have learnt that lesson the hard way with these prison sentences and the future confiscation of assets they tried to procure through their criminality. We are grateful for the support of the Crown Prosecution Service and other agencies in bringing these men to justice." CPS Senior Crown Prosecutor Stella Watter said, "The CPS and Specialist Police Team worked closely together on this complex case to disrupt the illegal activities of a criminal network and secure convictions. The group used an EncroChat messaging system to coordinate the supply of ketamine and cannabis between Bristol and Brighton. The investigation by Avon and Somerset Police was supported by CPS Southwest Complex Casework Unit, and together we built a compelling case which resulted in all the defendants pleading guilty. The illegal trade in drugs blight communities across the Southwest. The CPS is committed to working with our partners in the police to dismantle organised criminal groups and bring them to justice."